What's up everyone, I'm Eldridge and welcome to Donkey Teachings. In this series of guides I will take a tier and class of ships every week and then explore both currently available ships from that class and tier. For this first week I chose tier 3 cruisers, and as such the first ship we're going to talk about is the Tenryu. If you want to watch the review for the Tenryu first, click on the annotation on the screen, it will bring you directly there so you can see the stats for yourself before we delve into the tactics and how to play this ship effectively. The Tenryu receives standard matchmaking, that means it can meet ships from tier 2 to tier 5. Because the Tenryu is so lightly armored, fast and armed with such good torpedoes, that in my opinion the best way to play this ship is to play it like sort of a heavy destroyer. That means use your speed, use your maneuverability, sneak up close to enemy ships and blow them up with your torpedoes. Use your guns whenever necessary, but focus on getting those juicy ambushes with your torpedoes. Now of course do keep in mind you are not a destroyer. So you don't have the smokescreen ability, you don't have the engine boost ability. You are still a cruiser and that also comes with its perks. Your guns are fantastic and you are going to be able to take apart any destroyer you meet in a one-on-one duel just by using your guns. If you can effectively dodge their torpedoes, there's not that much they can actually do to you. But before we talk about all the fancy techniques to make this happen, let's look at some of the basic information about the ship. Firstly, let's look at ammo choices. Displayed here are all the ships the Tenryu can meet, and I've each marked them with the type of ammunition that you should preferably use. Of course, this doesn't mean that you should always just use that one type, but for every ship I have listed the ammunition type that is going to give you the highest possible damage on average. Now the on average part is very important, because that is the reason why I haven't marked the St. Louis with AP ammunition. As we will see when I talk about the St. Louis later this week, the citadels on the St. Louis are incredibly difficult to hit, and apart from the citadel, the armor on the St. Louis is very thin. So a lot of the times when firing AP ammunition at a St. Louis, you are just going to over-penetrate and not do anything. That may be okay when you're in a cruiser that has a lot of guns, because then sometimes you get a citadel hit and it's great, and the other times you still do a significant amount of damage. But the Tenryu only has 4 guns, so firing AP ammunition at a St. Louis most of the time is going to result in 1200 damage, and that's it. And as such, it's usually better to just fire HE, set the bastard on fire, and see that you can destroy some of his guns or other modules. All the other cruisers the Tenryu meets, however, have pretty good citadel hit zones, and the Tenryu's guns are more than capable of just absolutely smashing through those citadels and dealing monstrous amounts of damage. Of course, when these ships are pointing directly toward you or away from you, your AP ammunition isn't gonna do much, so in those cases fire high explosive. But do try to work with AP ammunition against these ships because it can be very rewarding. Against destroyers, battleships and carriers, you should always fire high explosive in the Tenryu, because in the case of destroyers and carriers they are so weakly armored that your relatively high penetration gun is just going to strike right through and do nothing, or in the case of battleships it is just not punchy enough to get through their armor. So a lot of the time you're just going to bounce or strike into their deck for almost no damage. It's really not worth it. Next we'll have a look at commander skills and upgrades. The first commander skill on the Tenryu should definitely be basics of survival. Pretty much all the ships at these lower tiers have problems with very thin armor in places, and the Tenryu is no exception. So you will be on fire a lot, you will get your modules knocked out a lot, and having that little bit of extra repair speed while your repair consumable is on cooldown is going to save your life sometimes. On tier 2 you want to take expert marksman. The turrets on the Tenryu are not as slow turning as they are on some of the other Japanese ships, but because you want to play it like a destroyer, you do want to have a little bit more speed in that turret traverse. Arguments can however be made for fire prevention at this tier. On tier 3 you absolutely want to take high alert. Same as for basics of survivability, your armor is so thin in places and there's so much high explosive flying around that you are going to be on fire a lot. And having that repair consumable come off cooldown a bit faster is absolutely worth it. At tier 4 I like to take Last Stand. The Tenryu, because of its thin armor in places, tends to get her engine and rudder knocked out a lot more than other cruisers. If you get your engine knocked out while facing side on to a St. Louis, you are dead. So keeping that maneuverability going, in my opinion, is the absolute key to success in this ship. Because the Tenryu is a cruiser, arguments can be made for advanced firing training. If you want to play the Tenryu a little bit more like a traditional cruiser, then advanced firing training isn't a bad idea. It's giving you more range, and that can be helpful. And because you're in a Japanese ship, Demolition Expert can also work out by just giving you that extra bit of fire chance to guarantee those fires on pretty much every salvo. And on the last tier for the playstyle that I'm suggesting, you absolutely want to take Concealment Expert. Those extra 12% of concealment actually do push the Tenryu into destroyer territory, given it's still the kind of destroyer concealment that the Gremiyashi suffers from, but it is still way within your gun range, and it is going to make sneaking up on targets a little bit easier. For your first upgrade slot you want to take Main Battery Modification 1. You don't get your turrets destroyed all that often in the Tenryu, but you get them knocked out quite often, and so having that 20% extra speed of repairing them is going to make your life a little bit easier. And the other choice for this slot is just not good enough for the money it costs. In the second slot I take Propulsion Modification 1. As I said, because this ship is a little bit more lightly armored, you do get your engine knocked out, and I think it's one of the worst things that can happen to you in a Tenryu, and as such I like to take this module to counteract that. You could however make an argument for the damage control modification, because getting set on fire less is also very good at these lower tiers. Now the Tenryu does share one very big weakness with all of the other Japanese ships, in that it has absolutely massive citadel hit zones. Now remember, I do not have access to the model viewer, so the hit zones that I'm highlighting in these videos are from my experience within the game. I've shot Tenryus in these places and have gotten citadel hits, and I could definitely say that the citadel hit zones come out of the water quite a bit. And if you penetrate any of these places, you are very likely to get a citadel hit. For you as a Tenryu player, that means you have to be incredibly careful as to how you maneuver on the battlefield. You have to be aware of where your enemies are and which enemies are likely to shoot at you. And when they do shoot at you, you have to maneuver to avoid their fire, because a well-aimed salvo by a St. Louis can leave you absolutely wrecked. Even some destroyers like the Isokaze, Minekaze, Gremiyashi and Nicholas are going to have a very easy time penetrating those citadels. So always keep that in mind when you're in your Tenryu. And now let's look at a replay, and I'll explain some more of the things that I like to do and that I like to focus on when I play my Tenryu. Alright, and here we are with the replay of the Tenryu in action, and I chose this specific replay because I actually happened to play out my sort of standard tactic both for this map and for this ship pretty perfectly, really. The first thing I always do is I look for the place where destroyers are going to be, and on big rays that is obviously the pocket. And so I go in here and lay down some torpedoes. That's the first thing I do. The torpedoes on the Tenryu only have 7 kilometers range, which is on the low side for Japanese torpedoes, but for this tier it's absolutely adequate. And they have long enough range to reach the other side of this area. And I only ever fire one salvo to begin with, because I do want to have some more torpedoes ready just in case I need them for, destroyers that pop up after a bit. My first shot at him incapacitates one of his guns, which is of course perfect, really. I want to limit his ability to fight back against me. I mean, I'm not really that afraid of an Umikaze, to be honest. The only thing he can do to really hurt me is torpedoes, and I think he has already fired his. And there I take out his engine, which is very unfortunate for him. Right after he beached himself, it's going to be very difficult for him to actually get some speed up. And 3,000 damage. That must hurt. And this is really the cool thing about the Tenryu, is having the ability to just win pretty much every fight against destroyers, because your gun's HE damage is good enough to just beat them and you have good rate of fire. Now, this other Tenryu in front of me made the mistake of thinking that he was a destroyer, when he in fact is not. This is a situation that you don't want to put yourself in. The reason I stopped is because I saw that there were so many of their cruisers coming into the pocket. Now, usually that is a death sentence for them, and it kind of ends up being a death sentence for these guys as well. However, if there are so many of them, they do have the opportunity to burst someone down with their firepower. As you can see, the Wakatake is still alive because he's a destroyer. He is going to dip back into stealth, he's not going to be detected, and it's going to be easier for him to just run away. You in the Tenryu, it's difficult for you to fall back into stealth. And so you have to be very aware of these situations you put yourself into. Now, I go at these guys very aggressively and do show them my flank. This is an incredibly high risk. And if any of them had loaded AP ammunition and aimed properly, they could have done a lot of damage to my ship. It was, however, a calculated risk. I was thinking if I can suppress them with torpedoes and with some gunfire and scare them, they might retreat, which is exactly what they end up doing. This Tenryu is actually driving backwards. I switched to AP ammunition, but I don't really get any good hits on him, and one of my guns sadly got knocked out. But I do actually manage to hit the Chester with one of my torpedoes. Now, that spread of torpedoes wasn't actually meant to kill anyone, that was just what I like to call a suppression blanket. It does end up killing the Chester because he doesn't have a repair kit for the flooding, and so he just gobbles up all the water, nom 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 nom, and then goodbye. Goodbye, Mr. Chester! But yes, as you can see, now I am on fire, and I can't repair it, and it's gonna be a lot of damage. This is why I was basically saying taking fire prevention is an absolute valid thing to do, and oh no, this Tenryu beached himself. That is very bad for him. I get a good Citadel hit. Sadly, the next salvo I fire was high explosive because I queued it up. Should have fired another AP salvo, I could have done a lot more damage on him. But yes, as you can see, I lost probably 4,000 or 5,000 hit points due to the fire, and that's really critical. So definitely a argument for fire prevention, but again, I maneuver so much that I do appreciate even just the few seconds that the expert marksman gives me. Now I was expecting to take some shot at the St. Louis, but it actually turns out that he's on the other side of that island. I didn't really realize that. But this Tenryu is doomed. I'm giving him some HE. The reason I'm doing that is because it's going to be very difficult for me to actually hit him with my AP. The thing with a lot of these Japanese cruisers is that their gun trajectory is very, very low. That has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it cuts down drastically on your shell travel time. If you look throughout this video, the the number left of my cursor in seconds, that is the shell travel time. That's how long it takes your shells to get to the target. And that number is incredibly low for the Tenryu and most Japanese cruisers, at least the lower tier ones. For American cruisers, including the St. Louis, shell trajectory is a little bit higher, and their advantage is they can fire over islands much better. However, it also takes their shells longer to get to the target, and that sometimes can definitely wreck them because it makes aiming a little bit more difficult at maneuverable targets. Now, what I've just fired there, those torpedoes are definitely a kill spread. I was pretty confident that that Kawachi was not going to get away from it, and apart from that, it's really just a case of capping the base now. We are absolutely destroying them on all flanks. I take out the Kawachi, which leaves them with 3 ships against our 7, and that pretty much seals their deal. But yeah, this is pretty much how you want to play the Tenryu. You want to go in, you want to fire your torpedoes, you want to harass with your guns, but don't overcommit. If it gets too hairy, don't be afraid to just turn around and go away. Go somewhere else, retreat, re-engage. You are one of the faster ships at this tier, and you really want to make use of that speed. The other thing of note in this replay specifically was that I also got set on fire quite a lot, and as you can see, I still have some hit points. That is definitely an advantage that you have over other destroyers. Destroyers do take much more punishment from fires than you do in the Tenryu. Because of your additional hit points, you can put yourself into situations sometimes where a regular destroyer would just die. But you, because you are actually a cruiser, you can sort of switch into the cruiser role and do some close range fighting against other cruisers, duke it out a little bit with battleships with just your gunfire. But all in all, you still want to make use of your torpedoes as much as possible. And now it's really just a case of taking out the St. Louis. However, we are capping, so we are just winning the game right here. And as you can see, I made an easy 1,500 experience. That was not my first win of the day. Topped the board. with my very aggressive play of imitating a destroyer. And if you follow these tips, you'll be able to pull results like this as well. Alright guys, just to quickly recap. When playing the Tenryu, imitate destroyer gameplay. But remember that you are not a destroyer. Know that you have great torpedoes with a relatively low reload time and make use of them liberally. Don't forget that you also have a set of very nice accurate guns that can really help you in taking out any ship that you engage. Use your speed and maneuverability to engage targets quickly while minding where you go so you don't get stuck or surrounded, but don't be afraid to just turn around and run away. And most importantly, protect your citadels. Make sure that you don't present your flanks unless you are confident you can maneuver out of the way of any incoming salvos. Alright guys, that does it for the Tenryu. I hope you enjoyed this guide. I had to go through a few iterations of it until I was really happy. Initially I wanted to make one video for 2 ships, but I couldn't really figure out a good way of doing this without either having a 30-minute video or just completely underrepresenting either one of them. And I'm actually happy with how it turned out. I can make both these guides in one go and then release them on 2 separate days over the week. Makes my schedule a bit easier, and I think the increase in quality was absolutely worth it. If you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. Next time in Donkey Teachings we'll be looking at the St. Louis, the other Tier 3 cruiser. And next week we'll be taking a look at some destroyers. But until then, I've been Eldritch Master Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.